reason why I launched Miss Wright Says is because I have my own experiences that I'm a firm believer someone else can relate to, and it probably will resonate with them. And so this topic was really near and dear to my heart because as a kid I wanted to be a psychologist, and ultimately through various career changes ended up in coaching. But I've always wanted to know what makes me tick and what makes other people tick. And we know that parents obviously have an impact on the outcome of their children sometimes. But then I also want to talk about other impacts outside of the home that can impact people's development or people's behavior. Community environment, access or limited access to education, healthcare, socioeconomic levels. I think it's common sense. We all know a lot of these things impact people's development and outcome. But I wonder, how might some understand the impacts of violence within a community? We always hear about black on black crime. You know, how is that impacting the community? Along with the threat of police brutality. For I think a lot of African Americans, there's that constant nervousness when you get pulled over by police, even if you've never been a victim of police brutality. You're fearful, oh my God, what's going to happen to me? And so how does that stress impact the psyche of African Americans, but then also the psyche of non-African Americans as well?
Well, I think for African Americans living under a constant state of threat heightens their alertness, heightens their sensitivity, which then makes things that happen to them have an even more powerful effect, right? Because they have to be on guard. So the danger is unpredictable. You're always in a place where you have to be a little more aware, a little more alert, or too aware and too alert, right? And then negative things happen, and it's almost like branding your brain. It like sears your brain, that heightened awareness, and then the trauma or dramatic situation pushes the brain to a limit, and it creates almost instant learning of negative reactions and negative responses. That's trauma. That's exactly what that is. And if you're in that constant state of awareness, it's easier to be traumatized because you're only this far away from being traumatized. The next thing pushes you that far. And trauma is a very elusive, dramatic kind of thing. It's subtle. It's not like breaking your arm where you know you broke your arm. You can be traumatized and not realize it, and then suddenly things pop out, things come out in different directions. I worked at the VA. I did my internship in the 80s, and they were just starting to figure out post-traumatic stress disorder. Right? The Vietnam vets had come back, and there were, all races of veterans coming back, right? And they all had the same exact problem, right? Heightened arousal, life-threatening situations. It created this trauma, this imprint on their brain. Now we have a much better sense of sort of how to handle that, what's that about, but there was so much confusion back then. And now I think we're all traumatized by the shootings, by the ISIS, by all the terrorist attacks. I think the whole country is in a state of trauma at this moment.
Something you said, and Dr. Lang, maybe you can speak about this as well, but the trauma and the PTSD. I was reading that for people who have experienced trauma, that it can be passed down from a DNA standpoint or encoded in their DNA. And I think there was a study of Jewish people who had lived through concentration camps and they had survived, and then their grandchildren had PTSD and experienced generational trauma. I don't know if you two have studied that or read about that in any way. But the reason why I bring it up is you think about when you say African Americans almost are in a constant state of trauma, if you think about the historical traumas that African Americans have experienced, I wonder how does that play on our psychology, even if I myself as an African American have never experienced racism or police brutality, somewhere because of my grandmother's experience or because I've heard about it or read about it or even seen it on television, how is that impacting me in some way?
I have heard about those studies. I haven't read up on them myself, but there is some sense of that trauma can be transported or transmitted intergenerationally beyond what it took place. or beyond when it took place. Being an African American male, I have experienced some of those things that was brought up, this notion of trauma, this being hypervigilant, and this healthy sense of paranoia that we have in our community. You know, are we looking over our shoulders, you know, when the police are behind us, and, you know, being mindful and watchful of where we are in stores and how people respond to us in terms of the way we dress and how we act. So that notion of trauma, it's ingrained, or we don't know if it's learned or if it's genetic, we're not sure. But there are studies out there that support that. In time, I guess we'll be able to tell as they make further advances with the, you know, Genome Project and our genetic makeup, what have you. Our field is going that way. It is becoming more evidence-based, more scientific in terms of its Western perspective. And having individuals who go through that constantly, it takes its toll. It's the straw that breaks the camel's back, as I mentioned earlier. And in today's context, a lot of people are just kind of fed up. Mm-hmm. I think about the three shootings, the 2 African American males that were shot, and then the Dallas shootings that took place at the police. People were like, I'm done. I can't watch another video. I can't take this anymore. Mm-hmm. People are up to here with it. Mm-hmm. And that impacts us individually, impacts us collectively and nationally. So I do agree, and we're all in a state of hypervigilance, trauma, on alert, and how we react to it is key. It's key. It's important. We have to inform ourselves. We have to be aware of what's going on around us and how we can educate. And I'll say this as well. Some level of trust has to be made between the different forces or wills at play. Open dialogue and communication between law enforcement and African American communities. Black Lives Matter. Building that, it's not this them versus us, it's this we're collective, and as long as we see each other as separate, we're not going to be able to break those barriers so that those walls of hypervigilance and defensiveness can come down.